Vinnie Hart ruled Liverpool's docks with an iron fist, while the McGrath Crew, a ruthless Irish gang fleeing deadly feuds in Dublin, quietly built an empire across the sea. No one saw the danger coming until Vinnie's lifeless body surfaced in the river, setting off a deadly turf war that would expose corruption, betrayal, and a city's darkest secrets. It started with bloodshed in Dublin, a city already familiar with gang violence, but unprepared for what came in early 2018. The McGrath Crew, once an unshakable force in the North Side underworld, found themselves suddenly exposed. Their rivals, the Burn Syndicate, had launched a series of coordinated attacks that left 3 senior McGrath members dead in less than 2 weeks. A car bomb outside a gym, a shooting at a family christening, a hit carried out in broad daylight at a petrol station. Dublin was on edge, and the McGraths were crumbling. The feud wasn't just personal, it was generational. These were 2 families who had once done business together, then turned on each other over greed, betrayal, and pride. For years there had been tense standoffs and low-level skirmishes, but now it was war, and the McGraths were losing. With their leadership gutted and their territory slipping away, the remaining crew faced a choice: stay and fight a battle they couldn't win, or vanish and regroup. For the McGraths, retreat wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. They had money, they had connection, and more importantly, they had a plan. Liverpool was the answer. The city had always been close, culturally, geographically, and historically. A few older members had lived there in the early 2000s, back when the gang ran guns through Merseyside ports. Back then, Liverpool was wild but profitable, home to dozens of crews all fighting for space in the city's dense criminal ecosystem. By 2018, many of those crews had faded. Some were locked up, others gone quiet, and some simply wiped out in their own wars. The timing was perfect. The McGraths began moving quietly, not all at once, and not in a way that would attract attention. First, the younger members, guys with no criminal records, crossed the Irish Sea using fake names or student visas. They rented flats in Toxteth, Kensington, and parts of Bootle, areas where a few pounds in cash could still get you a key to a door, no questions asked. Then came the rest. Businessmen, cousins, and foot soldiers disguised as construction workers, electricians, and logistics drivers. They didn't bring guns, they didn't bring noise, they brought money, discipline, and patience. Dublin was chaos, but Liverpool was opportunity. No one noticed the takeover, not at first, but behind the rented storefronts, pub takeovers, and anonymous bank wires, a criminal empire was quietly being rebuilt, brick by brick, euro by euro. The McGraths weren't running anymore. They were preparing to rise again. The McGrath Crew didn't storm Liverpool with flashy cars or violent outbursts. That wasn't their style anymore. Dublin had taught them that high-profile moves attract high-profile consequences. This time, they were going to build something different, smarter, cleaner, and harder to detect. They arrived with a long-term strategy and the kind of discipline that most street gangs lacked. No one in the city knew their names yet, and that's exactly how they wanted it. Their first step was establishing cover. They set up small businesses, nothing flashy, just practical. A car wash in Kirkdale, a corner shop in Wivertree, a kebab takeaway near the docks. Each served 2 purposes: to launder money and to create legitimate reasons for their presence. Everything was run in cash with fake staff and inflated income reports. These businesses were fronts, but they looked clean on paper, and they kept the crew out of the spotlight. They also bought into the local nightlife. Clubs and pubs were ideal for both laundering and logistics. Using intermediaries, they quietly invested in struggling venues and renovated them just enough to bring in crowds. These clubs became key outposts, places to move product, meet contacts, and gather intel. Security staff were hand-picked, not just for their size but for their silence and loyalty. Money flowed like water, but it was never spent recklessly. They didn't throw wild parties or wear expensive clothes. No gold chains, no sports cars. Their wealth stayed behind closed doors, stashed in safes and funneled into offshore accounts. They didn't want fame. They wanted control. The McGraths also brought a new kind of order to Liverpool's scattered underworld. Instead of fighting for corners or pushing out small-time dealers, they offered something better. Structure. They reached out quietly, offering better prices, guaranteed supply, and protection. No strings, just a handshake and a promise of regular earnings. Most said yes. It was easier than hustling on the street. What made their rise so remarkable was the lack of violence. No turf wars, no drive-bys, no kidnappings. The McGraths didn't need to intimidate. Money and opportunity did the talking. And since the police weren't chasing bodies, no one was paying close attention. By the end of their second year in the city, the McGraths had real influence. They had infrastructure, reliable distribution, and a growing network of allies. But their most valuable asset wasn't a person or a product. It was the silence, the calm before the storm, and Liverpool had no idea what was coming next. To truly control a city's underworld, power on the streets isn't enough. Information is everything. Who's being watched, when raids are coming, where drugs are being seized. Without access to that kind of intelligence, even the most organized operation is vulnerable. The McGraths understood this, and they made it a top priority from the start. They didn't just want to survive in Liverpool, they wanted to be untouchable. That's where Sergeant Colin Drake came in. On paper, he was a respected veteran of the Merseyside Police. 20 years on the force, multiple commendations. A familiar face at press briefings. But beneath the surface, Drake was drowning. He had mounting gambling debts, a failing marriage, and growing resentment for a career that had stalled. The McGraths didn't find him by accident. One of their early business partners, a nightclub owner with political connections, had once helped cover Drake's debts. That favor came back around. At first, the relationship was cautious. Drake provided small pieces of information, details about planned inspections, which clubs were being watched, and what names were appearing on internal memos. In return, he received envelopes of cash, always passed discreetly, never traceable. It was enough to ease his debts and give him a taste of power. But like most things, it escalated. Before long, Drake was doing more than tipping them off. He began pulling files, manipulating reports, and steering investigations away from their properties. He would delay warrants or conveniently misfile paperwork that would have exposed the McGraths' financial trail. Sometimes, he even helped sabotage competitors, passing along their weaknesses so the crew could strike at the right moment. He wasn't alone for long. Using Drake as a point of contact, the McGraths expanded their reach. A customs officer at the port who had turned a blind eye to certain shipments. A low-level court clerk who could flag sealed warrants. A data analyst inside the force who could erase or redirect suspicious activity reports. Each one was carefully recruited, paid well, and kept isolated from the others. That way, if one fell, the others remained protected. This growing web of influence gave the McGraths a huge advantage. They weren't just staying ahead of the law, they were shaping it from within. Liverpool's police force had no idea a trusted officer was feeding information to the very people they were meant to catch. And with every secret passed, the McGraths tightened their grip on the city, all without firing a single shot. By late 2020, the McGrath Crew had transformed from foreign outsiders to silent kings of Liverpool's criminal underground. Their growth had been deliberate, calculated, and unlike anything the city had seen in years. While other gangs fought for control with knives and guns, the McGraths bought it, piece by piece, deal by deal. And in a world where survival usually came through violence, their calm approach caught everyone off guard. The crew's power now stretched across the supply chain. From the moment a package entered the port to the second it was handed off on a street corner, they controlled every step. Shipments arrived hidden inside legal goods, ceramic tiles, frozen meat, machine parts. Bribes at the docks kept containers uninspected, while the paperwork passed through official channels without raising flags. Everything looked legitimate, and with Sergeant Drake in their pocket, Any unusual interest from law enforcement was quickly smothered. They didn't need to knock doors down to take over local crews. Instead, they offered something every small-time dealer wanted: stability. The McGraths provided consistent, high-quality product at unbeatable prices. They backed it with protection, unspoken, but understood. Anyone who joined their network got access to a supply chain that didn't dry up, enforcement that didn't overreach, and connections that stretched from Liverpool to Spain and beyond. No threats were necessary. The benefits were obvious. Most dealers switched sides quietly. Others were pushed out by slow suffocation. The McGraths would flood the area with better product, undercut prices, and isolate rivals from their sources. One by one, independent dealers either gave in or vanished from the streets. The old guard, the remnants of aging Liverpool crews, barely put up a fight. They'd seen what happened in Dublin and didn't want to become a cautionary tale. But not everyone accepted the new order. A few smaller gangs resisted, unwilling to lose control over their territory. They were careful, avoiding open conflict, but the tension grew. Surveillance footage showed meetings in car parks, unusual movement around stash houses, and late-night gatherings that didn't follow any known pattern. Something was building beneath the surface. Still, on the outside, everything looked calm. The streets were quieter, the violence had dropped, and to most of Liverpool it seemed like the drug problem had gone dormant. But what really happened was far more dangerous. The McGraths hadn't just taken control. They had created a system so clean, so efficient, and so hidden, that even the city's watchdogs believed things were getting better. Until, suddenly, they weren't. On the morning of March 3, 2022, a worker at Stanley Dock spotted something floating near the edge of the water. At first, he thought it was debris, a sack or maybe an old tire. But as he got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a body, face down, motionless. The man called it in, and within an hour the area was sealed off with police tape and flashing blue lights. The body was soon identified as Vinnie Hart, a well-known local dealer, and the last remaining leader of the once feared Dockside Boys. He had been missing for 8 days. His phone had gone dead. His usual haunts, bars, flats, and stash houses, hadn't seen him. At first, people assumed he'd skipped town, maybe run off after a bad deal, but now there was no doubt. Vinnie had a reputation. He was brash, proud, and fiercely territorial. For over a decade, he ran the docks, controlling drug distribution along the waterfront. But when the McGraths began expanding, he refused to play along. He declined their offers, mocked their business-like tactics, and vowed to keep his turf independent. He thought they were soft, Irish men pretending to be businessmen. He underestimated them. The post-mortem report was chilling. No bruises, no signs of a struggle, just a single bullet behind the ear. Clean, cold, and professional. His body had been weighed down, tied to bricks, but something had gone wrong. The current pulled him free. It wasn't just a murder, it was a message. Until then, the McGraths had built their empire quietly. No violence, no headlines. They had been ghosts, operating beneath the surface. But Vinnie's death changed everything. It marked the first public sign that someone was pulling strings from the shadows, and the city started to take notice. The police couldn't ignore it. Journalists began asking questions. Rumors spread fast about a new group running the show, about nightclubs being used for more than parties, about corrupt officers helping criminals stay invisible. The underworld knew what had happened, but no one would speak. Fear gripped the streets in a new way. If Vinnie Hart could be taken out so precisely, so silently, then no one was safe. Behind the scenes, the McGraths didn't. Journalists began asking questions. Rumors spread fast about a new group running the show, about nightclubs being used for more than parties, about corrupt officers helping criminals stay invisible. The underworld knew what had happened, but no one would speak. Fear gripped the streets in a new way. If Vinnie Hart could be taken out so precisely, so silently, then no one was safe. Behind the scenes, the The McGraths didn't blink. One problem had been solved. A barrier had been removed. Their message had been delivered with precision. And now, the silence they had relied on for so long was starting to fracture. Vinnie Hart's murder shattered the uneasy calm that had settled over Liverpool's underworld. For years, the McGrath Crew had operated like ghosts, quietly taking over territory without violence, avoiding police scrutiny. But now, with a body floating in the docks, everything changed. The police intensified their investigations, rival gangs grew bolder, and the fragile peace began to crack. Detectives assigned to the case dug deep, trying to unravel the threads connecting Vinnie to his killers. Meanwhile, the McGraths felt the pressure mounting. Their operations, once invisible, were suddenly in the spotlight. Whispers started circulating among local dealers and middlemen about who was really pulling the strings. Some began to question if the McGraths were as untouchable as they seemed. Inside the gang, tension grew. 2 junior members were arrested during a routine stop. The charges were minor, but both were terrified of facing long prison sentences. One of them, a young man barely in his 20s, saw an opportunity in his fear. He started talking. At first, it was small details, names of associates, locations of stash houses. But soon, the information grew more damaging. He spoke about the gang's money laundering schemes, their ties to road officials, and even the identity of their police contact. His revelations sent shockwaves through the investigation. Detectives suddenly had a roadmap of the McGraths' operations, something they had only dreamed of. But it also complicated matters. The informant was close to the core of the crew, making his betrayal feel like a knife in the back. Trust, once a luxury, became a deadly gamble. As word spread, rival gangs sensed opportunity. The dockside boys, weakened but not defeated, started reclaiming lost ground. Smaller crews, long pushed into hiding, became more aggressive. Low-level violence spiked. Stash houses were burned, dealers were threatened. The peace that the McGraths had enforced through money and subtle intimidation was slipping. The police, now armed with inside information, launched raids and wiretaps, gradually disrupting shipments and arresting key players. Yet, the McGraths remained elusive. Their leaders stayed in the shadows, communicating through layers of intermediaries. The gang was splintering, but the core still held strong. Liverpool was on the brink. The silent takeover was unraveling, and the city faced a dangerous choice: a return to chaos and violence, or a showdown that would change its criminal landscape forever. The lines were being drawn, and the stakes had never been higher. The information from the young informant gave the police something they had long lacked: a clear picture of the McGrath Crew's operations. Building on this, the National Crime Agency quietly formed a special task force, codenamed Operation Redwall. Their mission was simple but dangerous: gather enough evidence to bring down the entire network, from street dealers to their highest-ranking bosses. What they uncovered shocked even seasoned investigators. As they dug deeper, the task force found corruption running far deeper than anyone had imagined. Sergeant Colin Drake, the trusted officer who had seemed like an ally to the police, was only the tip of the iceberg. There were others: customs officers who allowed drug shipments through unchecked, nightclub managers who laundered cash, and even a junior prosecutor who buried charges against key gang members. The McGraths had carefully placed insiders throughout the system, each one playing a crucial role in protecting the gang. The task force began to map this web of influence. They monitored communications, tracked money flows through offshore accounts, and used undercover agents to infiltrate front businesses. Every day brought new surprises. What had seemed like a small operation in the city was actually part of a vast and well-organized criminal enterprise reaching beyond Liverpool and even the UK. One of the most startling discoveries was how the gang managed to keep their network compartmentalized. Members often only knew their immediate contacts, limiting exposure. Even those within the police force had no idea who else was involved. This made it nearly impossible to dismantle the group quickly. Taking down one link wouldn't necessarily unravel the entire chain. Meanwhile, the McGraths remained cautious, sensing that law enforcement was closing in but unable to pinpoint where the threat came from. They shifted tactics, increasing security and changing communication methods. Trust within the gang grew fragile. Paranoia spread. Some suspected their own allies were betraying them. Operation Red Wall was about to face its biggest test yet. The police knew that one misstep could send their entire investigation crashing down or put undercover officers' lives at risk. But the potential payoff was huge, dismantling one of the most sophisticated criminal networks ever seen in Liverpool. As the pressure built, the McGraths' hold on the city was weakening. The network of silence and corruption they had built was cracking under the weight of truth. What came next would decide not only the fate of the gang but the future of Liverpool's underworld itself. July 2023 marked a turning point in the fight against the McGrath Crew. After months of careful planning, Operation Red Wall had gathered enough evidence to act. Intelligence pointed to a massive drug shipment arriving at the Liverpool docks, a shipment that promised to be one of the largest cocaine hauls the city had ever seen. Hidden inside a container marked as ceramic tiles, the drugs were worth an estimated £45 million on the street. The police moved in swiftly. At dawn, officers surrounded the docks, locking all access points and bringing in specialized teams to inspect the cargo. The operation was silent and precise, designed to catch the gang off guard. When the container was opened, the cocaine was discovered, pure, packaged and ready for distribution. Alongside the seizure came a wave of arrests. 6 individuals linked directly to the McGraths were taken into custody, including trusted lieutenants who managed daily operations. Raids extended beyond the docks, targeting several nightclubs and properties used to launder money and store drugs. The authorities also seized cash, vehicles and documents revealing offshore accounts and business fronts. The blow to the gang was devastating. It not only disrupted their supply, but also exposed their sophisticated infrastructure to the public and law enforcement alike. The carefully maintained illusion of a silent, untouchable empire had been shattered in a matter of hours. Behind the scenes, however, the real shock was yet to come. Investigators uncovered that the operation's success came from a leak within the gang itself. One of the McGrath Crew's most trusted lieutenants had turned informant. His motivations were complex: pressure from law enforcement, fear of lengthy imprisonment, and possibly a desire for revenge. His betrayal was a gut punch to the gang's leadership, shaking their foundation of trust and control. This internal betrayal triggered chaos within the McGraths. Suspicions ran rampant as members wondered who else might be cooperating with the police. Communication became strained. Plans were altered abruptly, and paranoia spread like wildfire. The network that once operated with near-perfect coordination was now fractured and vulnerable. Rival gangs, sensing weakness, began to make their moves. The dockside boys, along with smaller crews, who had been pushed aside, started reclaiming territory and challenging the McGraths' dominance. What had been a quiet takeover was rapidly turning into a violent turf war. The Liverpool Underworld was entering a new, dangerous chapter, one marked by violence, betrayal, and a police crackdown that threatened to bring everything crashing down. The turf war that erupted after the Operation Red Wall arrests ripped through Liverpool like a storm. Rival gangs, long held at bay by the McGraths' quiet dominance, saw an opportunity they couldn't ignore. Violence flared across the city's streets. Drive-by shootings, arson attacks on known drug dens, and brazen robberies became daily news. The fragile peace was gone, replaced by fear and chaos. For the McGraths, the betrayal from within had not only exposed their operations but also shattered the trust that held the gang together. Suspicions ran wild as members turned on each other, accusing allies of being informants or traitors. Meetings became tense and paranoid, with once loyal foot soldiers vanishing overnight. Leadership struggled to maintain control as the crew's grip on the city loosened. Amid the chaos, a deeper betrayal surfaced. One of the McGraths' closest associates, someone who had helped establish their foothold in Liverpool years earlier, was discovered working as a double agent. This insider had been feeding information to rival gangs, selling secrets in exchange for power and protection. His treachery fueled the violence and accelerated the gang's downfall. The police, meanwhile, struggled to keep up. The sudden surge in violence stretched resources thin, and officers faced hostility from communities tired of constant crime and fear. But they pressed on, emboldened by the momentum gained from previous arrests and intelligence. Raids increased, and many minor players were taken off the streets. Yet the core of the McGraths remained elusive. Public confidence in law enforcement wavered. Critics questioned how such a powerful criminal network had operated for so long with minimal interference. How deep did corruption go? And could the city ever fully recover? As the turf war raged, innocent bystanders became victims. Shootings near schools and family homes shocked the public. Pressure mounted on politicians and police chiefs to act decisively. The media ran headlines about a city on the brink, while community leaders called for peace and intervention. In this climate of fear and uncertainty, a turning point emerged. One final, shocking revelation would force the McGraths' enemies and law enforcement to confront the true scale of the gang's influence, and the lengths they had gone to protect it. It was a secret that would change everything, exposing a betrayal far worse than anyone had imagined and reshaping Liverpool's criminal underworld forever. The final blow to the McGrath crew came not from guns or raids, but from a betrayal that cut deeper than any bullet. As the turf war raged and police pressure mounted, investigators uncovered a secret that no one had anticipated. One of the gang's founding members, a man thought to be fiercely loyal, had been working with law enforcement for over a year. This man, known only by his street name, Fitz, had lived a double life. On the surface, he was a trusted lieutenant, helping to oversee operations and keep the crew coordinated. Behind closed doors, however, he fed critical information to the police, slowly unraveling the gang from within. Fitz had reached a breaking point after the death of a close friend during the early turf battles, and his decision to cooperate wasn't just about self-preservation, it was revenge. His insider knowledge was invaluable. Fitz provided detailed accounts of shipments, money laundering methods, and crucially, the identities of corrupt officers protecting the gang. This led to a series of coordinated arrests, including Sergeant Drake and several customs officials. The exposure of such high-level corruption sent shockwaves through the city, forcing a reckoning within the police force and rebuilding public trust. Fitz's betrayal also revealed the gang's vulnerabilities. Without his inside information, many McGraths believed their empire was invincible. But with the police dismantling their network piece by piece and rival gangs exploiting their weakened state, the crew was finished. Their leaders were arrested or forced into hiding, and their businesses seized or shut down. The turf war eventually subsided, replaced by cautious optimism across Liverpool. The drug routes once controlled by the McGraths fragmented, allowing smaller gangs to rise, though none could match the scale or influence of the Irish crew at their peak. The city had been scarred by years of violence and corruption, but the grip of the McGrath crew was broken. The story of the McGraths in Liverpool became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, the complexity of loyalty, and the thin line between law enforcement and corruption. It showed how an outsider gang could quietly infiltrate a city, reshape its